Hey, Zach.
Thomas, how are we doing, buddy?
Pretty good.
Dude, I like the picture of the permit on your photo there.
Oh, thanks.
We got a serious permit addiction.
Oh, yeah.
It's a real problem.
It's not good.
No, once you go that direction, there's no coming back.
When's the last time you went permit fishing?
Man, I was down permit fishing in Belize about 3 weeks ago.
That's awesome. How long were you there for?
I just went down on a 5-day trip with my dad. Went down to a place I knew pretty well down by Punta Gorda. We had 2 good weather days. Actually, we had one day get messed up due to flights. We ended up with 4 days. We had 2 weather days and 2 good days. But yeah, we ended up sticking 7 and landing 4 for 2 days of fishing, which is pretty good.
Dang, that's really good.
I've spent a lot more time catching a lot less with permit.
For sure. Was it like a lodge setting, or you guys were kind of just doing it?
There's this place called Garbets, which I've got Ben looking into for hosted trips as well. But it's a couple brothers that we stay at their house versus do like the lodge experience and like the high end accommodations. We stay in just like a little beach cabana and kind of like DIY for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We take care of ourselves, but we fish with them, when the tides are good.
Sure.
And yeah, it's good. It's like they make it really affordable. It's like affordable permit fishing that's also pretty productive. When you throw a good shot at permit, they actually turn around and eat the fly versus just spook like everything else. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's pretty atypical. Have you ever done any of the other permit species?
No. So I spent 3 years living in southern Belize for like my apprenticeship from like 17 to 20, guiding permit for a guy named Julian Cabral. It was kind of like I was the boat guy. I was kind of doing everything to just get experience. So pretty much all my permit fishing has been, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, Caribbean, more or less. I'd love to fish the Indo-Pacific permit, and I'd love to go fish some of the permit like Oman and the Red Sea, but I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, that's where that image is from. That one's from Oman. We were shooting a film, and we went with Ocean Active.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was back in, what year was it? 2021? Maybe
back when Oman still got safe.
Right, exactly. It was like the day we left was the day that some Israeli oil tanker got by them.
Yeah, it's already got you over there right now. The Iranian drones coming out of both sides of the strait and all sorts of weird shit.
It is one of those weird spots where it's like, it's safe and you feel safe while you're there, but you definitely are in this pocket in the middle of...
Yeah, the on inside, that kind of, I guess the eastern side of the strait's okay, but everything north, south, and west is super, super dangerous.
Yeah, there was actually a day, that trip, where the group kind of decided we wanted to do some stuff more on foot. We did a lot of our fishing for boats, but they wanted to try doing some stuff on foot, so we kind of drove up towards the border with Yemen. And as you're getting closer and closer to the border, the checkpoints are starting to ramp up and like security's kind of tightening down, and
the guy who's, hey, what are you white boys doing here? Yeah, the plate for you.
They take our passport at every checkpoint, and they definitely progressively, it would get a little bit longer each time we handed off our passport. But our driver who was running our vehicle, I was asking him sort of just like trying to get his perspective on it all. And I was like, yeah, like, what would it be like for you to go to Yemen right now? And he said, oh, for me, I have cousins in Yemen. I was like, well, what about for someone like me? He said, oh, for you, big problem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, don't do it.
Said, do not even attempt to get near that border. So, yeah, they do mean it. That's the type of crazy stuff you can sometimes, run into when you're traveling.
Well, and that's where all the good fishing is. It's like I've been trying to figure out Somalia for the longest time.
You've got your sights set on what, GT?
But a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, there's if you really look into it, there's like 25 or 30 different species of game fished. The off fishing's unbelievable. They got GTs, they got milkfish, they got Indo-Pacific permit, they got everything.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was hoping to talk to you a bunch about fishing and travel and obviously hosted travel, since you've got this, big trip coming up to the Amazon.
Yeah. Which I can't wait for.
Yeah. It seems epic, and we'll sort of dive into a bit of the details, and I'd love to hear sort of what you're most looking forward to. But I guess first, you've obviously traveled a lot around the world fishing and otherwise. Can you kind of like walk me through what your life experience has been with international travel and kind of, trying to get off the beaten path and explore new places?
Yeah, so I've kind of lived a two-part life. So I've had, half of my adult life has been as a professional skier and doing hosted trips around the world, Europe, Japan, Alaska, doing, heli-skiing and backcountry skiing. And then the other half has been, destination fishing, really kind of poking the bear with Central America and spending a lot of time chasing roosters and spending a lot of time chasing permit, but then also working for like Los Locos down in Baja and working down at like Tropical Lodge in Panama and bouncing around doing a bunch of different stuff and kind of sorting it out. It's not one of those things. I've been fortunate enough to make enough money in the summer with my own guide business that I've been kind of perfectly comfortable blowing it all every winter, traveling and trying to find the next best thing. And like I went to Japan to go skiing and I ended up fishing Japanese taimen instead of skiing. It's been like, that I've gone other places fishing and found, like amazing ski destinations, kind of gone back and forth. I found that they've kind of played well off each other, but it's just kind of the excuses to travel and trying to make it where it's like, a reasonably priced experience. I'm not staying at top-end lodges. I'm doing more of the DIY. And then when I find things that are really good, try to bring in the crew of people that I've always fit and traveled with and make it approachable.
Right. I was going to ask, so how has the skiing kind of fit in with the fishing? Is it like it sounded like you weren't necessarily planning to go fish, but obviously Japan has amazing skiing opportunities and, you've got the taimen, you've got hammer pike, the different types of like cherry salmon and yamame and all of that too. So I'd imagine sometimes you just kind of stumble across stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it. Like I got my Japanese taimen introduction from sitting at a ski lodge cafeteria, and a guy dropped his wallet, and I kind of tracked him down, like, "Hey man, I found your wallet." This guy named Sean. And I was like, he's like, "Oh, thanks so much." And we started shooting the breeze, and sat down, we're having lunch, and I was like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" He goes, "Oh, I'm from Seattle, and they hired me to come in and do Japanese taimen research." He's like, "But we're only allowed to catch them on barbless fly. And all of us are researchers, none of us have ever fly fish." So it's funny, I've never been a researcher, but I know how to fly fish really well. So, well, I'll tell you what, if you want to come fishing with us tomorrow, if you catch the fish, we'll tag them and do all the research stuff. All right. So shift gears from skiing on my own and ended up spending like a week or 8 days, fishing Japanese taimen in northern Hokkaido. And, that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Have you ever encountered that type of thing before where there's sort of like that overlap with the exploratory nature of some of this, I guess, like some of this destination travel to fisheries that I guess aren't necessarily as well documented and kind of the research aspect?
Yeah, I think when you find people that are hungry to explore, it doesn't really matter what venue they're in. It could be bikers, they could be skiers, they could be fishermen, but they're all kind of looking for that same thing of that unique combination of resource, lack of pressure, and people they can trust and kind of collaborate with. And I find that even though they're kind of different mediums, they translate very well because even though, we're, a fly fisherman and a backcountry skier looking for two different things, sort of, but they also relate very, very well together.
Right.
And driven people, if you're driven to go out there and find that, you kind of have to be open. You might not find what you're looking for, but you're going to find something that's outside the box you can kind of take everything with a silver lining. Okay, I didn't find the best outer skiing I was looking for, the best terrain, but hey, I just found this untapped fishery. Like, what an incredible thing. You kind of have to be adaptive with that. Right.
Did you do a lot of very ski-centric travel where you weren't thinking about fishing?
I did. I was on the free skiing qualifying tour. So they make the free skiing world tour was something I was, always liked to ski in is big mountain competitions. Before that, I was a mogul skier. So I was very, competition based, but I also knew that I always got hurt and things would happen. So I always had a couple fly rods and enough gear to fish anywhere I went as a backup, just so I wasn't sitting there bored. So I just always had fishing as a plan B, just in case. And I found that the two always kind of correlate. When I was in Alaska and Haines, it was like off season for the salmon run, but hey, the Chilkoot River, I could go in there and fish Dolly Varden and grayling and something like that and have just a blast. And, you're like, there was rods, and turns out everyone else, kind of hops in your car and you go fishing for a couple of weeks instead of skiing.
Right. I'd imagine even at home too, it's sort of the same type of deal. I mean, you're up in Lake Placid and you've obviously got amazing fishing and also, the Olympics have been hosted how many times in Lake Placid?
Twice so far, 1932 and 1980.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny. It's like sometimes those two things, they seem to go hand in hand kind of no matter where you are.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
When you're thinking about travel and doing it sort of in the preliminary stages, like, I guess, could you kind of walk me through how you think about taking like the idea of a trip and sort of turning that into, an actual hosted experience for a group of anglers?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I'm looking for kind of a hosted trip, what I really look for is a resource that's not necessarily untapped, but has been very well protected and generally has a lot of local knowledge and input. Like everything you do in the Adirondacks has, like, in my case, 7 generations of my family looking after, taking care of that resource, really knowing what we're doing and protecting it, but also including other people into what we do. So, like, I really look for a resource, but I also look for whether it's an indigenous culture or a group of locals that really have a fine-tuned interest in that resource and really take care of it and really appreciate it. And, like, I think with what we're dealing with on the Erie River down in Kendjam Lodge, we have this natural entity that's taken care of by generations of indigenous culture that we're kind of working within we're working within the confines of, like, respect and what they allow. And I think that allowing wherever you go, that sect of people to have control over the resource is really, really important. I think if you have people that come from the outside and try to kind of play God or try to do too much, that there's no way to really really respect it the way that, kind of the intrinsic knowledge does. So, resource and a culture that's appreciated that resource and welcoming people in are kind of the first 2 things I really look for. Same thing with Belize. I started out with the Cabral family, which is a 7th generation Portuguese family that's been out in the Keys and fished the Keys and really has been sustainable for a long time. Now I work with the Garbett family, same thing, multi-generations. Everyone in the family is involved in not only having business now, but having a business for generations down the road. So they're not short-sighted. They're very much looking for the future and what's sustainable. And sometimes, like, it might mean that your trip isn't going to be the best trip for the overall common good. Like I will have people in Lake Placid hit a really good day of fishing these big lake trout, but I generally tell people, hey, we're going to catch 1 or 2 of these big fish, but they're too special to even though it's catch and release, go hit 6 or 7 fish, and it's not really the way this works. We have to keep the pressure down to a minimum. People respect that. Like, and if we did that one day where we hit it too hard, we might ruin a whole season of seasons to come. So, I don't know, I kind of look for the same thing when I look at other lodges, other people, other things. And that's really what attracted me to Brazil is how they really allow the local culture to dictate the rod count, how we do it. When they have a set prerogative, because this has been working for them at this point for, millennia, then I feel confident this is sustainable and something that I can bring people to and keep showing them the same experience, not year 1, but year 10.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that is such a cool aspect of this Kendjam trip and having that type of a time scale with, like, the local community and their land management practices and just their approach to resource management. It's definitely just, at the very least, just for peace of mind, understanding that you're part of a system that's designed to not degrade, but to, promote this type of activity for the long term. It definitely feels like the right way to go about it.
Yeah. And, then all of a sudden, by incentivizing catch and release fishing and making that lucrative for the indigenous culture, then all of a sudden you're incentivizing, the fight against deforestation. You're incentivizing, people, having illegal trades in that area that are more lucrative because all of a sudden the sustainable tourism industry is lucrative and it benefits everybody. So it's in everyone's best interest to actually look out for the place. Because, at the end of the day, if people don't have that, they're going to make sure their families survive and they're going to do whatever they have to do that. And you can't really knock them for it, but that's how we get into problems.
So I guess once you've started to establish these interpersonal relationships with people in some of these places, how does that then progress into actually putting the idea of a trip together?
I think it's a lot of asking and listening. And I think if you do that, then you come to an atmosphere that's really warm and welcome. Like if you come in, you overpower and say, okay, we're going to do this. You might not have the atmosphere that you want to bring clients to. If you let them kind of invite you and let them make the ideas and the rules and take our time, like, one of the things I love we're doing with Kendjam is we're not trying to force it this summer. We are figuring this out the right way, and we're doing it a year out, which gives us the right clientele the group fits, and we can make sure that they're happy with the way we're organizing stuff and have a choice to, the chance to voice it before we get there.
Right. And sometimes the answer is going to be no in some regards. I mean, maybe not the trip as a whole, but for, certain aspects, certain, areas that you might want to go explore. And that just sort of opens the door for you to pivot and maybe even find some new stuff too.
Yeah. And every no is, an opportunity to cut your losses and move on to someplace else. And every no is also realizing that times, politics, and people change. So, you backdoor it for 5 more years, and maybe you leave it in positive light and say, hey, may I come back and ask you this in 5 years and see what the situation is? And if you do it politely, they say, yeah, check back in. Let's see what we can do later on today. Right now is not the time. And they'll appreciate the fact that you backed off and respected that word. The next time, you got a lot better chance.
Sure. So in the spirit of traveling to fish, or maybe even fishing to travel, thinking about previous adventures that you've personally taken, and I mean, we've already talked a little bit about the unique community aspect, but maybe you could touch a little bit more on some of the other ways that this trip is maybe sort of stands out from some of the trips that you've done in the past.
Yeah, I think when it really comes down to fishing or really good hunting or really good skiing, that the fishing, the hunting, the skiing is actually comes down to almost the least important part. The chance to be introduced to a culture, something we know nothing about, that ability to find new things and take a lot of fun in it is really kind of the goal. I'm just as much interested in sleeping in the pitch black and listening to the jungle noises and understanding their food, understanding their families and their culture as I am the fishing. The fishing, yes, we are fishermen, but I would say the other part of the experience is 90%. Catching the fish is like 10. For me, the thirst for fishing, travel, all this comes into just really understanding a different perspective, different way of life, how they see things and get things done. They're also relatable to where we come back to, but it's just so cool to see that experience. And the fishing is more or less just the avenue we get there. But what we get out of it isn't necessarily, did I catch a 14-pound peacock bass or 18-pound peacock bass? It's, what did I learn from the local guide? How cool was it hearing the cacophony of night noises in the jungle when I grew up on the edge of the boreal forest and the Canadian border? Just that difference and everything else it brings is, to me, really the jewel of the travel.
Yeah. And I guess there's also the fact, like when you're going on a trip, sometimes you might be in a village, sometimes you might be in an urban center, sometimes you're truly off the grid. And this, to me, just feels very unique in that you are really embedded within this Kayapo indigenous community in the heart of the rainforest. Like, these people have been living off these resources and fighting to protect them from extractive industry and deforestation for thousands of years. So I think you, in some ways, are also, as the host, you can learn from them, but also play off their strengths as people who really understand the resource and the fishery to help elevate that trip to a point where you wouldn't be able to do that without their insight.
Yeah, I think their insight is the most valuable part of the whole thing. And, for me, hosting this trip, I could go there for the entire week and never pick up a fly rod, but watching the fish, watching the reactions, watching what's going on, especially coming from a guiding background, the observation of what's going on to me is actually more interesting than casting a fly, hooking. That sitting back and understanding something new and a whole new perspective from something I haven't seen before is more attractive than fishing myself.
Yeah. Have you noticed any major differences in maybe people's approach to guiding across different regions as you've traveled?
I have. A lot of what I do is like, hey, you made a lousy shot. Great. Brush it off. What'd you learn from it? I've always said with all my clients, you learn a lot more from the fish you don't catch than the ones you do. When you hook a fish and all of a sudden it's in the net, it's like, I'm sure first time you hooked a big permit and all of a sudden it all went to plan. All of a sudden it's in the net. It's like, it's almost like a black hole. It's a time warp. You black out. You're like, all of a sudden you went from like outside hooking it to it's in the net. You're like, what actually happened? But what you lose teaches you more than what you catch.
Yeah. Do you think you've taken any sort of specific instructional tactics or approaches to teaching from the time that you've spent in these other places when you brought it back home to your guiding?
I really think I have. You know, I've taken a lot of what I've around the world, and what I've brought back home is basically building a system where people can have 100% personal confidence in me. You know, the one thing I like to do is be like, okay, I know I can be a half hour early. I know I can be well dressed. I know my boat can be perfect, and I know the food can be impeccable. You know, if you start with those things, it shows you really care. And those are things, it's like, even though it's just those little details when people show up, even if it's subliminal, they're like, wow, this guy's early. He's well dressed. He's got, you know, food he started making 2 hours before the trip. This guy really cares. And then you get into the day and you're like, hey, you know, we're going to miss shots. And like, I always tell people, if you're not losing my gear and you're not messing up, then you're not trying to give me your all. And I really want you to not worry about breaking a rod, losing a fly, splitting a line. Doesn't matter. That's built into the cost. I think a lot of people are too timid to actually let themselves out in front of the guy, because really you're being vulnerable, right? You know, you're paying for the trip, but then you're showing them all your shortcomings and, you know, asking them to either treat it well or not.
Right.
So I think the biggest thing I've learned as my takeaway from guiding is to really build teams for the long run and build confidence. And I tell people, you know, listen, I charge a fair wage for one day, but what would be a wage that you want to charge that you would be willing to pay for 10 days? Because let's do that. I want to see you 10 days this year, and I want to actually build on this, because, you know, if I'm not going to make much money as a guide, no matter what I do, I really want to be proficient at what I do. You know, I want to build a team. I want to go hunting, and I want to be a good team. I want to do the best we can. But that takes teamwork, and that takes building.
Yeah. And I think that also ties in really nicely to another question I had, which was, what sorts of folk do you think should really consider joining these types of hosted experiences? And I think that, you know, that block, setting aside that kind of block of time to immerse yourself in a fishery and to be able to progress or improve over that period of time, that's kind of a unique aspect in itself that you might not get, you know, just doing a day trip or getting out for an afternoon with a guide.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, and like, I guess it comes back to like, so like, even with somebody like coming on this trip, you know, like we're looking at this a year out, people coming into this trip, it's like, I'm already willing to be like, hey, come stay in Lake Placid and let's do a couple days of casting work on my boat. Like, let's get you on the same program. Let's do our homework and let's give you the best tools you can to be productive on this trip. But let's build this team ahead of time. Like, let's 6 months out, start our casting. Let's not wait till the day of our big trip to figure out how our rod's working, you know, at the river. Let's have 6 months of 3 times a day in a soccer field, figuring out all these little nuances. So when we get there, man, we got the best chance. And I'm willing to keep that for free. I want to build this team before we get there.
Yeah. What does like a successful trip down there look like for you as a host?
I think successful trip to me as a host is delivering exactly what the expectation. I think setting realistic expectations, whether it's someone might be coming down, they might be really excited and be like, I'm excited too. But understand this, like if we go catch a 20-pound peacock bass of a lifetime for the whole trip, like we're winning. Like don't expect 3 a day, or because the last group went and caught 5 fish, don't expect that to be your expectation. You know, set your goals. We're hunting a certain fish, not just passively fishing and hoping the best happens to us. You know, and I just want people to understand that at the end of the trip, no matter whether the fishing was good or bad, I want them to say that was exactly what you said it could be. That was the exact parameters of good to bad, what to expect, things you can control, things you can't control. I was not misled. I feel very confident in this. And if people really want to go on the trip and want to spend their money, that's great. But what I really want to do is try to dissuade people from the trip and make sure I give them all the worst case scenarios and everything that might or might not happen. And are you still okay with this? Because this is a possibility. And I don't want to mislead you and promise you the moon when we're not going to get it.
Right. But at the same time, I mean, what is baked into all of this time planning and scouting and really trying to understand the ins and outs of these locations ahead of time is trying to minimize those types of risks too.
Yep.
Like just looking at your trip that you have to Kendjam next year, August 29th, September 6th of 2025. We understand that this region of the globe goes through certain climate cycles, and there's, you know, a rainier season, a drier season, and that can really impact the water conditions and the types of fishing opportunities that you're able to have. That particular time of our summer is it's known to have, very low clear water. And that's typically what you can expect that time of year, which leads to really awesome sight fishing conditions. Yes, could it rain unexpectedly for a week straight before the trip? There's always a possibility, but, you try to minimize those types of risks.
Yeah, we control the variables we can control. And it's like, yes, we want crystal clear low water, but we might not get it. So, I'm going to bring and tie a whole host of, I'm going to bring heavier rods. I'm going to tie gurglers. I'm going to tie things that have a much bigger silhouette. I'm going to try to say, hey, if we need a plan B, we got a plan C. We got more plans. We're not always going to get what we want, but I'm going to be prepared for every other nuance. It's like, if we're trying to fish water that's got 3 times more volume than what we expected, we need to make 3 times more noise. We need to have 3 times better presentation. We need to do what we can do to mitigate that.
And it's not even, something aside from what you expect isn't even necessarily worse. I mean, if you have higher flow, the fish might be a lot snappier and might be, looking to eat more aggressively than they would otherwise. So even the stuff that you run into along the way that isn't exactly what you'd expect, and this is obviously all still hypothetical, I mean, you can kind of turn any of that into a positive.
Yeah, and just because say peacock bass or wolffish are easier to target in low water, clear conditions, doesn't mean it isn't better fishing for other stuff that has a different food source and a different water level comfort. So it's like, the beautiful thing about this place is we've got, 11 targetable, game fish, but there's, 30 more that people aren't like, oh, that's not a game fish. I don't care. They're still fun to catch. But all those conditions play into the wheelhouse of all those other fish. So it's like, if we don't have the perfect conditions for peacock bass, guess what? We got 10 other things we're really looking for. Let's target that. Let's pit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know the specifics of this, but I know that Pat and Nathaniel from the angling company are going to be also doing a trip the week prior. And, they are very interested in, IGFA tippet records. And I know they've been kind of eyeing the books and taking a look at where some opportunities potentially are. And, they should probably try and set the bar high, because there's always the opportunity for you to come in the week after and put some records on the books for yourself too.
Well, you know what? And I strategically picked the week after them, so I had more intel for my group. I'm pretty well versed in this, and they've got a very kind of a little bit tighter prerogative than I do. And I'm like, okay. The best thing I can do for my group is let them figure some things out. How they share that information, I don't know. I know they're very good fishermen for people, and it really is just about the clients getting on fish. I personally am not chasing any records or any contests myself, but more information is better, because the other option was I was going to go for them, and, which I'm fine with, but, if I can gain the benefit of their knowledge, then, hey, I don't see anything wrong with having more information.
Right. Absolutely. So I guess, is there anything in particular that you're most looking forward to? Maybe just in terms of the experience itself, but also, I mean, we've already talked about some of sort of like the target species that are top of the list. You've got the wolffish, the peacock bass, the payara, and then some stuff that's less, it sort of flies a little bit more under the radar, some of these other species. Pacu, a lot of people have heard of. Matrincha, I'm probably butchering the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the bicuda, which is a really interesting looking fish.
It's like a fresh bicuda.
Yeah. It's crazy. They actually, I saw the other day, the Kendjam Instagram put up a little video clip of a small bicuda that was on someone's line just getting absolutely smoked by a bigger one.
Yeah, and I like that a lot.
Yeah. There's some aggressive, toothy fish down there. So, yeah, what are you most looking forward to?
I'm really interested to getting down there and hearing what the, kind of indigenous guides hold at the top of their kind of respect pyramid. For me, I would love to get, 2-3 days into the trip hunting for 1 or 2 shots for 1 or 2 fish. It's really worth it. For me, it's not a numbers game. It's kind of a quality over quantity. But I'd really like to hear their perspective, what they think takes the hunting, the timing, the challenge. I really like going fish hunting And I would kind of like to go down and, kind of listen, learn, and feel what's going on with conditions, what's available, what they think a cool mission would be, and kind of play off that. I'm pretty open to fishing for anything, but I'd be very interested to hear their perspective first.
Yeah. I think also something that's really cool are the watercraft that they're utilizing to kind of navigate this network of rivers too. And just very different from a lot of the stuff that you'd see fishing here in the U.S.
You're not sitting in a Hell's Bay, getting pulled over White Sand Flats. You're off a dugout canoe, pushing it through rapids, going upstream to access like another section. And to me, I kind of love that. Like I love the journey as much as I actually love getting there and actually getting the job done.
Right. And it's such a cool spot because they do kind of have this perfect marriage of having these sort of more rustic traditional aspect and those insights and those tactics from the Kayapo. But then at the same time, you have this state-of-the-art lodge that's just sitting in the heart of the jungle with all the amenities and delicious, gourmet cuisine that you could want. And you can also dial it back. I mean, they give the option to go kind of do a little outpost camp as well, it sounds like, if you want to kind of go and do sort of like a base camp type situation and camp upriver.
Yeah, to me, that sounds pretty cool. I like the idea of kind of the primitive camp that a little bit out of the way. That seems like a cool opportunity to me.
Yeah. What sort of things are you doing to prepare yourself, thinking about kind of exploring this brand new fishery that you've never been to before?
A lot of what I'm doing is kind of, I'm trying to learn about it. I'm trying to do all my homework, but a lot of what I do and I really think about fishing is sit down on my vise. I'm kind of imagining what those fish eat. I'm researching what they want to eat, what their possible food sources are. I think a lot of my imagination comes down to sitting at my time vise way ahead of time and kind of running through those on my own scenarios in my own head. It's kind of like your daydream state well ahead of time, trying to put all of the what ifs and coulds and shoulds happen. But I mean, a big part of it is gear management, right? Being prepared, floating, sinking, intermediate, all the different leaders, all the scenarios, all the flies. A lot of it too is trying to do as much research to understand this new resource, be ready for kind of anything that comes your way, because it could be, 10-foot 6-weight fishing for Pacu presentation. It could be fishing at 10 or 11 weight for fishing 14-inch game changers for giant peacock bass. And it could be anything in between. There's a really dynamic gear set involved in this, that it could be the same stuff I'm using presentation fishing on the Delaware, or it could be the stuff I'm throwing at GTs in the South Pacific. And it could be like all the same day where they're spotted, which is, to me, pretty cool. A lot to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Kendjam has a lot of really great resources and sort of suggestions in terms of flies. But I think what's cool is to sort of take what you know best and try and apply that to come up with maybe a new, more, a new approach that hasn't been tried before. You obviously target a lot of really big, aggressive game fish, big lake trout, pike. Are there any specific tactics that you're bringing to the jungle from your experience on your home waters?
Yeah, I'm really going to try to bring, really good presentation, but castable big flies. I'm trying to bring some of the hollow core / game changer castable flies that also create a lot of disturbance and will pull fish from a lot further away. I think there's kind of a blend of, a lot of people think big flies equal a lot of weight and hard to cast. And I think there's a kind of a thing going on right now that Popovic started, and a lot of their fly tires, Lane Chocolate and Popovic have started, where you can have these amazing presentations, but you can also hand them to a person that maybe doesn't have the greatest casting ability and they can get it there. It's not like throwing a mop. And I think a lot of what I'm really focusing on too is just being able to get the fly where it needs to go. Different presentation lines, different temperature lines, splicing lines for long distance, but, making sure that the guide said, well, that's where the fish is. You got enough backcast distance to get it there. Make sure you can get it there.
Are you planning on bringing tying materials and a vise down there with you?
Yeah, I am. I think I'm going to bring enough to at least be adaptable to cover any situation that comes my way. I'm going to try to be very well tied beforehand for not only me, but everybody in the group. The other thing I meant to bring up, the one big thing that I like bringing places that I've been very successful in, and almost everybody hates it right off the bat, is, I'm a Northeast striper fisherman. So I live with a stripping basket around my waist, and very few people fish a two-handed strip with a stripping basket well. And most of the time you go to the Keys, you go wherever, and they see strip bass. They're like, get that thing out of here, this and that. But I'm telling you what, when you're dealing with moving water and you deal with rocks, you're trying to do it in 1 or 2 false casts. I'm a huge stripping basket guy, and I'm planning on kind of introducing that. And that's one thing that a lot of my research in the Amazon, almost any place I've ever researched, no one's carrying a hard stripping basket. And I know people tell me that's bullshit. That's not worth your time. I've gone elsewhere, and it's worked for me. Doesn't work for everybody else, but I've had a lot of success sticking to the things that I already know and I know I do well, and then kind of blending them with what I need to learn and what's going on. But, just because it's a new type of fishing doesn't mean you need to change everything. You want to keep a couple things the same because you want to, you go to a different basketball stadium, to play a game with a new team. You don't change your shot. You change the venue, you don't change the shot. So I'm going to try to take a lot of what I already do well in the Northeast and try to adapt it to there. And I'm going to bring enough that if it works for other people, I can allow them to grab a basket, see what I do, take it or leave it. But I think for what I believe that fishery is going to hold, that could be a big advantage. And that's just, a Northeast guy bringing Northeast things elsewhere.
Yeah. What do you kind of prefer? You like the rigid tub style ones or the mesh, like the packable one?
No, I like the hard bass. I like to use it to carry stuff in the jungle if I'm picking up pineapple or coconuts or fruit. I've always liked those hard baskets, and I always like to pack my bag with one of those hard baskets because I put my sunglasses and my reels and everything that's fragile, especially with checked baggage, in those baskets as a little bit extra buffer in case it gets crunched during air travel.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I find that actually really helps me.
Yeah. Have you seen those, I don't know, have you encountered those flexi stripper things before?
Yeah, so I got my dad one. He took a trip to the Seychelles last year, and a hard basket wasn't up. And the hard baskets are really a two-handed strip. The flexi strippers are good because you can pivot on, say, on your left hip and do a long one-handed strip. I think they both have their place. I will definitely bring my hard basket, but I will definitely bring a couple of those flexi strips and see what's going to work.
Yeah. That's there's a lot to try out and a lot to look forward to, I think. And that's the cool part about trying to, do some of these trips to these new places where you don't exactly know 100% of what you might encounter or what the situation will be, but you always know that it's going to be a story.
Yeah, exactly. And you might be like, hey, I tried this new thing. It was a game changer. The locals adopted it. You might go down there and say, I tried this thing I've always had success with, and it didn't work. It was incredible. I thought it was going to be the cat's meow. I got taught otherwise, and it could be either one.